Speaking of global warming, we need some global warming.
This is the president.
It's freezing.
And this is the guy he chose to lead the EPA.
There's only one thing standing in the way with respect to us seeing a tremendous change across this country, and that's the government.
Scott Pruitt, Oklahoma's former attorney general. So I went to his home state, a place where oil and gas companies set the rules.
What's the relationship then with the state officials and the oil and gas industry now?
Pretty cozy. Some would argue much too cozy.
And communities are paying the price. Their ground is shaking.
Holy cow.
I thought Ron and I both was going to be killed.
Their air is polluted.
It's no different than ingesting poison.
Their homes are deadly.
This is something like you would see at an oil and gas facility.
Will the country follow in the footsteps of Oklahoma?
We're in the worst shape here in Oklahoma, and you're going to put him in charge of the EPA?
He's weakening the agency, and it's quite deliberate.
Is the nation doomed to become a wasteland?
I'm Natasha Del Toro, and I'm in Oklahoma. This is Scott Pruitt's home state. I've come here to see how his leadership has impacted communities and what it might mean for the future of our country.
When I was a kid, my image of the state came from watching the old movie Oklahoma. It was an unspoiled landscape. It was a happy place.
Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day.
But on my journey through Scott Pruitt's Oklahoma, I found a very different reality.
Having an earthquake right now. Our light's shaking quite a bit here.
That was the largest quake on record to hit Oklahoma.
A lot of people on edge right now, not knowing really what to expect.
So this big pile of rocks is what was the chimney that came down?
And this weighs probably maybe 70 pounds.
This is Ryan Ladra and his mother Sandra. In 2011, a 5.7 magnitude earthquake rattled their home in Prague, Oklahoma. It was the strongest quake in the state's history.
That is really heavy.
Yeah,
I can't imagine this falling onto your knees.
Oh, they were just coming down all around us. I thought Ron and I both was going to be killed, and he thought he was going to watch me be killed right in front of him. You know, it was pretty traumatic. Okay.
Sandra was rushed to the hospital. Both of her knees were injured. This is a picture of how they looked after the quake.
They put 12 stitches in this knee. It was hurt the worst, but both my knees swelled up really bad and black. And then these little pink flowers right here.
6 years later, Sandra still struggles to walk, and her home remains damaged.
I really need rails. That's what I need. It's been awful on the whole family, you know. I don't know how much longer it's going to take, but I hope someday we can feel like we used to when we're at home.
Earthquakes used to be rare in Oklahoma. That's until 2009, the start of an oil and gas boom in the state. In its worst year, there were 888 quakes here, more than in the rest of the continental U.S. combined.
We were up around 6 per day, 6 felt per day.
This is Todd Hallahan, a geologist with Oklahoma State University.
And so these guys are called the Seismic Sound Lab, and they basically took our earthquakes and they made dots that get colored, and they also add sound to it. So for Oklahoma,
Hallahan tells me that in 20 years in the field, he's never seen anything like this.
So this is real. This is
the real data. And this is when we were starting to accept that it was man-made.
Holy cow.
Now, a lot of people have heard of fracking, a drilling technique to extract oil and gas from deep underground. But that's not what's causing the bulk of the earthquakes in Oklahoma. It's the wastewater. This is how the U.S. Geological Survey explains what's happening. When oil and gas is extracted, dirty water comes to the surface. The contaminated water is then pumped back into the ground. The process has put pressure on Oklahoma's fault lines, triggering earthquakes. Yes, you heard it right. These earthquakes are caused by humans, and they're shaking most of the state. I'm here in Cushing, Oklahoma. In 2016, this oil town was hit by a 5.0 magnitude earthquake. 7 months later, it's still recovering.
Several of the buildings here have been severely damaged. If you look right behind me, the sidewalk is still closed off. There's parts of the street that are closed off. There's glass on the ground. There's piles of bricks everywhere.
I could see all the crazy dust and everything and debris come flying. I could hear all the bricks falling. And
William Finsel was right here the night of the quake.
it was like a bomb went off. It was insane. It was pretty long.
What kind of impact has it had on the town?
Shaking them up quite a bit.
About 50 buildings were damaged. Many local businesses have since closed.
The theater is no longer in use. The tag agency, which was closer for most folks, the Lions Club, they're no longer having their building there anymore. So, you know, a lot of people in town suffered a lot.
It could have been even worse. Cushing is America's largest storage facility for oil, holding close to 80 million barrels of oil at any given time. Researchers predict that a big earthquake could set off a major catastrophe.
Lord forbid something would happen to those. It would just be a disaster.
The impact of a big quake could extend far beyond Cushing. It could actually threaten the nation's oil supply. Nearly 3/4 of our crude oil is transported through Cushing. Remember, earthquakes weren't the norm here. Now, they were the price of doing business.
Were people mad at the oil and gas companies themselves?
Oh, you betcha, but you can't bite the hand that feeds you, so they don't want to try to sue the company that's helping pay their kids' tuitions and stuff.
Oklahoma is an oil and gas state. The industry is the state's top employer. It drives the economy and essentially dictates state politics. So much so, there's an old oil rig right in front of the Capitol. For these companies to accept they could be causing the quakes would be a huge problem for the state's leading industry.
Like I say, these have been happening in areas that there's no oil and gas activity in.
Coincidence is not correlation. This area has been seismically active over the eons.
We're coming up the grand entry to the fourth floor rotunda, which is it's the centerpiece of the Capitol.
When a dome was built on the Capitol in 2002, the oil and gas companies that helped fund it made sure legislators would always be reminded who paid for the roof over their heads.
Look at this. ConocoPhillips.
Yeah, Oklahoma Company.
Halliburton.
Was. Oklahoma Company was.
Phillips Petroleum.
Oklahoma-based company to begin with.
For 15 years, Mickey Thompson was the president of the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association, the state's largest lobbying group for oil and gas.
You get a really quick glimpse of the impact and the power of the oil industry in Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, it's right there.
Yeah.
What's the relationship then with the state officials and the oil and gas industry now?
Pretty cozy, I'd say. Some would argue much too cozy.
One of the legislators that he lobbied here was none other than Scott Pruitt when he was a state senator. That was before 2011 when he became the Attorney General. Pruitt, a Kentucky native, started in Oklahoma politics in the late 90s.
He was a good vote for our interest.
For the oil and gas industry?
Yeah, even as a young state senator.
During his 6 years as Oklahoma's Attorney General, Pruitt issued no public statements and took no legal action to address man-made earthquakes. This is Corey Williams, a Democratic state legislator.
You're the state's attorney. You should have sued the oil companies on behalf of the citizens of Oklahoma for the things they were doing to cause damage to people's property and risk their lives.
During the hearings to confirm Pruitt as the head of the EPA, his response to the earthquake problem became a focal point.
You're in a state which is seeing a record-breaking number of earthquakes. You're the Attorney General. Obviously, you have stood up and said you will do everything you can to stop future earthquakes.
Senator, I've acknowledged that I'm concerned about
You acknowledge that you are concerned. Your state's having a record-breaking number of earthquakes. You acknowledge you are concerned. If that's the kind of EPA administrator you will be, you're not going to get my vote.
But Senator Sanders' vote didn't matter. Under Trump's leadership, Scott Pruitt was confirmed to head the very agency charged with protecting Americans from environmental disasters. As my journey continues through Pruitt's home state of Oklahoma, I discovered earthquakes are just the beginning.
To have our home contaminated is sickening.
Please describe your environmental philosophy of what you would do to protect our environment.
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I indicated in my opening statement, I believe that the role of a regulator is to make things regular.
At his confirmation hearing to head the EPA, Scott Pruitt sounded like a man committed to enforcing environmental regulations.
Protecting our water quality, improving our air, helping protect the health and welfare of our citizens is key to the leadership of the EPA, and where enforcement is necessary, a vigorous enforcement.
As Oklahoma's top lawyer, it was Pruitt's job to protect people against those violating their rights. And for some communities, that meant the oil and gas industry.
We're here at Standing Bear Memorial Park, and you can see the refinery directly behind us here.
Wow. Today I'm visiting the town of Ponca City, home to the biggest oil refinery in the state, which is owned by Phillips 66.
The way that it smells here, it's not good.
Mikasi Camp Hornick is a Native American activist.
Look at all this smoke that's
it's just billowing out
into the sky.
According to the EPA, this plant emits a way higher than average amount of toxic chemicals, like cancer-causing benzene. Not only is Ponca home to the refinery, there's lots of other industry activity here, including a plant that makes rubber products, fined by the EPA and state regulators multiple times. The Ponca tribe says they're surrounded on all sides.
The environmental stressors that we deal with on the everyday basis lead to not only respiratory illnesses or the high rate of cancer that we have, but also just a sense of oppression when you're constantly breathing in toxic air.
Mikasi says cancer has touched every family in his community.
Have you lost people that you love?
Yeah, my Uncle Carter Camp, and my dad's a cancer survivor.
Cancer deaths here are among the highest in Oklahoma, but the state has found no evidence that the industry in Ponca is linked to elevated rates of cancer. We reached out to Phillips 66 about the tribe's concerns, but they declined to speak with us. Next, Mikasi takes me to the Arkansas River, the lifeblood of the Ponca Nation.
This is the Salt Fork of the Arkansas River, and this is a river that runs through the center of my community. Directly upstream from here is the refinery, fracking wells, and oil and gas wells between here and there.
While it might look like any other river, over the past 5 years, there have been 7 episodes of fish kills, thousands of fish washing up dead. Local environmental officials launched an investigation in 2015, but they haven't been able to pinpoint the cause.
My family's been camped here for 141 years. I grew up hunting and fishing here. I grew up playing in the water here. It's just home. And to have our home contaminated, it's sickening.
That night was the Ponca's annual powwow.
Are you dancing tonight?
No, I'm just here to celebrate our culture and our life with my people here. I'm kind of like a big family reunion for the entire tribe.
The Ponca tribe has been living in Oklahoma since the 1800s, after they were forced to leave their homeland in Nebraska. Activism runs deep in their lineage. Mikasi's mother, Casey Camp Hornick, is a prominent activist. She says they struggle to live in a community with so much industrial pollution.
It is a human rights violation from the time we wake up in the morning until the next 24 hours.
For the Ponca tribe, the chance to hold polluters accountable diminished when Scott Pruitt became Attorney General.
The first thing that he did was dismantle the legal arm of the Attorney General's portion that deals with environmental issues here. And so the environmental issues that ordinarily you could call your Attorney General's office doesn't exist anymore.
Instead, Pruitt launched a unit dedicated to fight federal overreach.
As the Oklahoma Attorney General, I believe it's important to use the office, the tools of the office, the Constitution and the courts, to hold Washington accountable.
His main target? The EPA, the very agency he's now leading. Starting in 2011, he sued the EPA 14 times, asking the Obama administration to back off oversight and leave enforcement up to the states.
He thought there was too much government, particularly at the federal level, and he thought that there were too many regulations on private enterprise.
Some of you may be governor, some of you may be a congressman.
Pruitt's predecessor, Drew Edmondson, who's now running for governor, has been critical of Pruitt's conservative views, which are popular throughout the state.
It may sound politically attractive to a segment of the population. We're going to have more jobs, we're going to create a stronger economy, and they don't realize that the regulations are there for a reason, and that's the protection of public safety.
Pruitt joined forces with energy companies in all but one of the lawsuits he filed against the EPA. Records show several of them were prominent donors to his campaigns and political causes. His corporate ties didn't sit well with environmental activists, including Casey Camp, so she went to Washington to speak out against his nomination.
We are terrified at the idea of him becoming the head of the EPA because that blocks the avenues that we have for any remediation at all.
We're in the worst shape here in Oklahoma, and you're going to take this guy whose career has been paid for by the industry and put him in charge of the EPA?
I can't take no more. Just can't imagine leaving it, but I can't keep my family in here getting poisoned.
I'm back in Ponca City, a community that many residents say is ravaged by industrial pollution. Today, I'm meeting Native American activist Mickasey Camp Hornick at an oil storage facility. Since 2016, Mickasey has been working with Sharon Wilson, a certified thermographer from the environmental group Earthworks, to monitor gas emissions in his town. It's typical for oil tanks to vent gases into the air, some harmful to one's health.
Earthworks came and brought this amazing camera that captures the emissions that we can't see with our naked eye.
The infrared camera has become a first step for industry and regulators to detect the presence of methane and other dangerous gases like benzene, though it can't tell you which specific ones you're looking at.
It's so windy, we're going to have to look at it in high sensitivity. And you just look for movement, a cloud.
So yeah, you see movement here.
We pointed the camera at the top of the tank, but it was a windy day, so we couldn't tell much. More tests need to be done to know what we're seeing, but methane leaks are always a concern anywhere oil and gas is stored.
How does Oklahoma compare in terms of how they regulate this kind of stuff?
There's basically very little to no regulation.
In fact, only 4 states regulate methane emissions from oil and gas facilities. Oklahoma is not one of them.
Methane leaks directly contribute to climate change.
Reducing methane emissions was part of the Obama administration's efforts to tackle climate change.
Now we'll keep working with the industry to make drilling safer and cleaner, to make sure that we're not seeing methane emissions.
In 2016, he finalized regulation to curtail leaks. Back in Oklahoma, Attorney General Scott Pruitt joined forces with industry and 13 other states to sue the EPA. His mission? To overturn this regulation.
It's an invasion, in our estimation, of the state regulatory domain, and it's
Pruitt's alliance with the industry is not new. According to a New York Times investigation, in 2011, he had sent a letter to the EPA opposing efforts to limit methane leaks, which was copied nearly verbatim from a letter written by Devon Energy, one of Oklahoma's largest oil and gas companies, and a donor to Pruitt's campaigns. At his confirmation hearing, he was asked to explain.
Why do you need an outside oil company to draft a letter when you have 250 people working for you?
Senator, as I've indicated, that was an effort that was protecting the state's interest and making sure that we made the voices of all Oklahomans heard on a very important industry to our state.
You said it all heard, but you only sent it on behalf of a single voice, the oil company. Thank you.
We asked Devon Energy about the Times investigation, and this is what they told us. We often serve as a resource with information and expertise for lawmakers, and that it would be indefensible for us to not be so engaged. While Pruitt was fighting to overturn the EPA's methane rules, some of his constituents in Oklahoma were facing the consequences of living in oil and gas country.
They're over there waiting on you.
Sherry Walls and her family live in Ponca City, close to the reservation, and even closer to the big refinery. In 2013, her gas company detected a methane leak in her home.
They told us to be on standby to leave at any moment during the night.
What were they so worried about?
Explosion?
Methane is so flammable that it can blow a home to bits. This is her husband, Chris, soon after the leak was discovered.
They're telling me I won't have gas until I got 0 readings for 5 consecutive days. Is that going to happen 7 years from now? I really doubt it. And it's hard.
The problem was so bad that they had to move out. The Oklahoma Corporation Commission, the state agency that regulates the oil and gas industry, investigated Sherry's case. Officials suspected the leak was coming from an abandoned oil well, of which there could be tens of thousands across the state. In Sherry's situation, they couldn't find it.
They've dug up my yard. I can't even tell you how many times that they've dug up my driveway.
Sherry and her family of 5 were left bouncing back and forth from motels to rentals for nearly 3 years.
So we were already having financial issues. My husband had had 4 knee surgeries. We kept running into brick walls.
Her husband kept track of the days they were displaced from their home. In an act of desperation, he even dug a hole in one of the bedrooms, hoping to find the leak himself. This is him using a home gas detector. As one of their last resorts, the Walls reached out to the state's chief lawyer.
I had called our Attorney General, Scott Pruitt's office, and this is the letter we got back. There was a complaint form that we filled out and we had to return to their office.
So you called them, they sent you this to fill out a form. You filled out the form?
Yes.
And what happened?
Nothing. I never heard from them again.
You never heard from the Attorney General's office again?
Nothing. What's your name?
But then, a year and a half later, it seemed like their luck was changing. The Corporation Commission decided to install a ventilator.
This is the switch that will turn that ventilation system on.
All right.
The Walls moved back in and thought everything would return to normal. But not so fast.
That was making us all sick, you know, headaches. I started talking to my neighbors and they were saying they were getting headaches.
We met up with Sharon from Earthworks at Sherry's house to get her take on the ventilator.
So she's turning on her camera. Oh, wow. So what is this? I mean, is this unusual to you? What are you seeing here?
Well, I've never seen anything like this on a house. Yeah, I would say that's unusual. This is something like you would see at an oil and gas facility.
The camera can't tell exactly what's coming out. It could be methane or something else. But I started feeling sick.
Yeah, you can smell it.
Yeah, it usually don't smell that bad.
can't take no more. My husband and I, this was our home. I just can't imagine leaving it, but I can't keep my family in here getting poisoned.
After 4 years of their ordeal, Sherry says the added stress was too much for her husband. On Father's Day, 2 months before we visited Sherry, he committed suicide.
I think that a lot of what happened with my husband, losing my husband, had a lot to do with this house.
Blow it. Blow.
We were all exposed to it for all these years.
That's a pretty strong statement.
At that moment, the earth started rumbling.
So I came to Oklahoma to see if I could learn more about, Scott Pruitt and his environmental record in the state. We've talked to a lot of people who feel like the state is putting industry interests, above their safety and their health.
I'm finding that to understand Pruitt, you have to understand Oklahoma politics. His pro-industry philosophy is widely shared here at the state capitol, controlled by Republicans. First thing to know, the legislature has been battling over the worst budget crisis the state has seen in decades.
Lawmakers are still searching for a solution to Oklahoma's budget crisis.
As many as half of Oklahoma's nursing homes could be forced to shut their doors.
An elementary school teacher in Oklahoma says that she has to panhandle for classroom supplies.
Most agree that a significant chunk of the billion-dollar deficit comes from huge tax breaks given to the oil and gas industry.
Our infrastructure is crumbling. We're not investing in education. Yeah, we're in a huge budget crisis.
4 hours.
Democratic State Representative Corey Williams has been a leading critic of the Republican budget, a plan that includes some tax increases and spending measures, but no increase to taxes on the oil and gas industry. For Williams, it's not enough.
Yeah, and who was at the negotiating table whenever you announced this, Mr. Speaker?
In October of 2017, his frustration over tax rates spilled out as he confronted the House Speaker during a news conference.
I'm supporting it by putting it on the board.
That's not true.
To give them a vote on it.
Why don't you actually come down and do something?
This is bull.
Well, I'm glad you think so. So does most of Oklahoma.
You seem like you have a lot of anger and contempt towards the government here. Am I right?
The oil and gas companies go advocate their position, and my colleagues just believe them hook, line, and sinker without doing their own homework.
Speaker Charles McCall said he was unavailable for comment. Back in the 90s, when the oil industry was struggling, lawmakers gave the industry huge tax breaks to invest in new drilling techniques.
This piece demonstrates some of the things that we got enacted into law.
At the time, Mickey Thompson was the president of the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association, the state's largest oil and gas lobbying group.
We went to the state legislature, controlled by the Democrats, and said, we'd like for you to cut our taxes.
And Thompson succeeded. But here's the catch.
What we did was never meant to be permanent, and it was never meant to be applied when the industry was in salad days.
The low tax rate stuck, and these days, Oklahomans are feeling the sting.
It has put a hole in our state budget of monumental proportions. Public education in Oklahoma has taken a tremendous hit.
I'm in this tiny little town called Crescent, Oklahoma, and I'm passing by a school on a Friday morning, and it's completely empty. There is no one here.
Nearly 1/5 of Oklahoma's school districts have gone to 4-day school weeks to save money. Crescent is one of them. I spot 2 students, so I ask them how they feel about their new schedule.
So what do you do on Fridays on your day off?
Cheer practice or go to the driving range with my family. Football games.
To the G. To the O. Yell. Go. Go. To the G. To the O. Yell. Go. Go.
Sure, at that age, I'd love Fridays off too. But is this really the way to prepare them for the 21st century economy? Today, Oklahoma has a distinction of making the deepest cuts to education in the country. A stark contrast to fellow energy state North Dakota, which used its oil and gas boom to fund public schools. Education isn't the only area suffering. The budget deficit has forced crippling cuts in all facets of the government, even at the state agency in charge of dealing with the earthquake crisis, the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, or OCC.
Things are very, very difficult right now.
Here's spokesperson Matt Skinner.
We planned for a very bad budget year.
After years of quakes, in 2015, the OCC cracked down on wastewater injection. The agency shut down or limited disposal in 20% of the state's wells. They even created a seismicity department to focus on the issue. The problem? It was only funded for 1 year.
We have done what we can to keep this top priority going.
So how could it then be a priority to the state to do this kind of research and have a seismicity department like this and not have funding for it?
That would be a question for the budget writers in the state.
The regulations were starting to work. The number of earthquakes dropped. But according to scientists, Oklahoma is still at risk for a big quake.
We're waiting on somebody to die.
That's a pretty strong statement.
At that moment, the earth started rumbling. It sounded like a truck was passing by.
Welcome to an earthquake.
That's an earthquake?
Mm-hmm.
Whoa.
It's still going.
That was my first earthquake. It was small, 2.6 magnitude, but it still freaked me out.
That's intense.
It is. That's what we live with all the time.
And who are you with? Are you with Fusion?
Yes.
I'm not interested. I'm sorry. No thanks.
Y'all are just a natural. Yes, you are. Yeah. Oh. No.
Remember Sandra Ladra, who was severely injured in the 5.7 earthquake in Prague? In 2014, she filed the first earthquake-related lawsuit in the state, suing 27 oil and gas companies. This suit was the first of at least 8 cases filed by people whose homes were damaged in quakes.
Hey, just a minute, doggies.
So how important then is it for citizens like yourself to be the ones to speak out? Do you think it's really, this is your job?
Well, when it affects you like this, it becomes your job, whether it should be or not. Yeah. It's a life-changing event.
To win these suits, Sandra's lawyers had to prove the quakes were man-made, and that the oil and gas companies denied the scientific evidence even as the research became clear.
Scientists are sounding the alarm, saying the threat is real. We should be prepared.
A team of scientists concluded it was likely caused when oil drilling waste was pushed deep underground along a fault.
They ignored the science. They ignored the increasing number and magnitude of the earthquakes.
For Mickey Thompson, a retired lobbyist, the industry's reluctance to admit their role in the quakes is a troubling act of self-preservation.
The companies are very nervous about lawsuits, and I can understand that. The legal strategy for the Oklahoma oil industry is what Muhammad Ali used to call rope-a-dope.
Which is what?
Lean on the ropes and just let them hit you and don't say it, don't do anything. Don't fight back. Don't talk about it. Don't, maybe it'll go away.
Thompson says his former lobbying organization, the Oklahoma Independent Petroleum Association, or OIPA, downplayed the science behind the cause of earthquakes for years. This is A.J. Ferrati of OIPA in a May 2017 radio interview talking about his organization's position on the link between wastewater injection and quakes.
Our industry has not taken a position on that, but has worked very carefully with regulators, with those that have a concern, to try to resolve the issue.
Ferrati has called for more research and says his group is working towards a solution with state regulators. But for Thompson, it's too little too late.
I was upset and disappointed that the leaders in the oil industry in Oklahoma would not speak out, would not agree to do more in the early stages.
What was going through your mind during that time when your colleagues who you'd worked with for so many years weren't listening?
You know, I helped build a really powerful political machine here, and I wish it wasn't so powerful.
For 4 months, we requested interviews by email and phone with this powerful political machine, the energy companies, industry leaders, and lobbyists, including the OIPA. I even stopped by the OIPA headquarters in Oklahoma City, but no one was available to talk to me. So when I ran into OIPA's AJ Ferrati at a conference in Washington, D.C., I had a lot of questions for him.
Are you AJ?
I am.
I've tried contacting you. I just wanted to ask you for a documentary because we were in Oklahoma.
Who are you with? Are you with Fusion?
Yes.
I'm not interested. I'm sorry. No, thank you.
We just want to know the OIPA's official position on the earthquakes. But why is that not something that you would answer? It's a a lobbying organization.
It's not the appropriate place or time for this.
You guys want to answer our questions anywhere else?
I've already declined. Thank you very much.
It's about safety, isn't it?
I had seen a lot in my time in Oklahoma, from the troubles in different towns, to industry's practices, to Scott Pruitt's close ties to oil and gas companies. I wanted to know what all of this meant for the rest of the country, now that Pruitt is in charge of the EPA.
You said that Scott Pruitt is uniquely dangerous. What do you mean by that?
He's weakening the agency, and it's quite deliberate.
Mr. Pruitt, can I ask you a question?
No, we can't stop.
After crisscrossing the state of Oklahoma and meeting people dealing with environmental issues, I found a scientist who works closely with the EPA to explain Scott Pruitt's impact on the agency.
The EPA has a mission, and it is to protect public health and the environment. And everything he is doing is either counter to or tangential to that mission.
For 14 years, Deborah Swackhammer, an environmental chemist, has been a member of one of EPA's scientific advisory boards, an independent group that reviews the science behind the agency's regulations.
Now went through 3 presidents, and now with this administration, we're just seeing this interference with the science advice. And my fear is that he's loading up these boards with people that will support that bias, as opposed to people that will just review the science and give objective advice.
So, congratulations.
In the first 10 months of Pruitt's time at the EPA,
major headline from EPA Chief Scott Pruitt,
dozens of regulations have been weakened or eliminated.
He will sign a new order tomorrow, and he declared the war on coal is over.
The U.S. has pulled out from the Paris Climate Accord.
We owe no apologies to other nations.
And Pruitt continues to align with industry.
You said that Scott Pruitt is uniquely dangerous. What do you mean by that?
He's weakening the agency, and it's quite deliberate. He's very effective at doing that because he's a very skilled lawyer, and he has done this for almost 2 decades in Oklahoma.
And now Pruitt is in Washington, D.C., so I've come to try to get some answers from him.
I've been trying to get an appointment with Administrator Scott Pruitt. I have called his office several times. I've sent multiple email requests. I even visited his office. So today, I'm here at a conference where he's going to be speaking.
This is an annual event convened by the Federalist Society, a conservative group that happens to get donations from big names in the oil and gas industry.
Congress recognized the importance of bringing states along in regulation to ensure that you dealt with the particular issues of that state and the needs of the communities. Thank you. Thank you.
He didn't take questions, but in a sea of lobbyists and lawyers, I got my chance.
Mr. Pruitt, can I ask you a question?
No, we can't stop. He'll be back.
He'll be back. I wanted to ask you some questions about Oklahoma. Well, there he goes.
After all this, That was the closest I would come to getting a response from Scott Pruitt. But that's not stopping the people we met in Oklahoma. They're taking action. Is this you and your husband right here?
Yes.
3 years after she first filed, Sandra Ladra settled her groundbreaking lawsuit with more than 24 oil and gas companies for an undisclosed amount.
I am not against oil and gas. I know they're important to Oklahoma. We have to have them. But it's just got to be a safer way.
She says she can finally rebuild her home.
Yeah, it's not all oil and gas. But
Mickey Thompson, the lobbyist who once pushed for low taxes on the oil and gas industry, is now working on raising them. He's formed a coalition that's behind a ballot initiative to fund Oklahoma schools through higher taxes on the industry.
We're talking about my grandkids and the quality of the education, the quality of the life that they may lead. This is serious stuff.
About 2 months after we visited Sherry Wall's house, state regulators went to test for methane.
We're going to take another run at it right here, guys. That's good. 3.7.
The news wasn't good. There was still methane. Now, Sherry's grappling with this reality as a widow.
I'll finish what my husband started. So yeah. I miss him so much. It's tough emotionally, mentally. But, you know, if I had the extra money, I could just jump up and run and wait for them to decide what to do. But 4 years of this is nonsense.
Keep it in the soil!
The Ponca tribe keeps fighting against industrial pollution. This time at the Phillips 66 offices.
This is our home now, and it's our responsibility, our duty to take care of it, to protect it.
They were pleased when a new ally joined their cause, Sherry. It was her first protest.
We're going to stand together with you to bring attention to what's going on in your home. We want you to stand with us.
There's no time for us to take short steps anymore. There's no time for us to be tired anymore. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Many Americans across the country are waking up to the call, concerned that without proper industry oversight and respect for science, the country could become the next Oklahoma.